City Clerk, would you call the roll?
Alderman Braithwaite.
Here.
Alderman Nguyen.
Here.
Alderman Wilson.
Here.
Alderman Holmes.
Here.
Alderman Tindem.
Here.
Alderman Grover. Alderman Rainey. Alderman Burris. Alderman Fisk. 9-0.
We have a quorum. Welcome to the Monday, June 10th, 2013 meeting of the Evanston City Council. First item on the agenda is Mayor's public announcements and proclamations. I do not have any. Next, City Manager, is public announcements from you.
I do not have any.
Thank you. And City Clerk.
No announcements, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Next is citizen comment. I'm going to call the first four speakers, and you each please state your name and address, and you each have 3 minutes. Jerry Specht, Jackie Axe, Marjorie Fuhara, and Eileen Heineman.
My name is Jerry Specht. I and my wife have lived at 9342 Lincolnwood Drive. That's 60203, zip code, Evanston, Skokie. I have requested that Governor Quinn veto House Bill 183, and that's the SP1, which Corporation Counsel Farrar will be talking about in the special order of business. This bill has various defects, the first being override of local laws concerning handgun regulation, licensing, possession, and registration, in addition to its concealed carry aspects. Second, allowing people with loaded guns into a business or a house unless a sign is posted at the entrance to prohibit it. Third, allowing loaded guns in establishments serving alcohol but getting less than 50% of their revenues from drinks. And fourth, and most egregiously, the fact that municipalities have only 10 days from the signing of the bill to enact ordinances restricting assault weapons. 10 days is ridiculous. But I think that Evanston should not wait until a concealed carry law is signed, but should proactively pass an ordinance prohibiting the possession of assault weapons by anyone other than law enforcement officials. But thinking about this issue more broadly, I don't understand why this provision about a time period for enactment of assault weapon legislation is part of this concealed carry handgun law to begin with. So that's another reason for the governor to veto the bill. But I think regardless of what happens with that, I think that Evanston should just proceed with an ordinance prohibiting the possession of assault weapons by anyone other than law enforcement officials. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jackie Axe. I have lived in Evanston, my husband and I, for 45 years. I'm here tonight as the co-leader of the Evanston St. Nicholas Parish Peace and Justice Committee. For the last few months, our committee has been involved in actions having to do with gun violence prevention issues in Illinois. For example, on May 26, we sponsored a petition signing opposing the concealed carry Senate Bill 2193. Approximately 200 parishioners signed the petition, which was then sent to members of the Illinois Senate. Although we were pleased that the bill did not pass, we were disappointed when House Bill HB 183, the Firearm Concealed Carry Act, did pass in the Illinois Senate and in the Illinois House. After the passage of that, one of the members of our committee met with Governor Quinn, and she expressed 3 areas of our concern. First, the bill does not prohibit the carrying of concealed guns in places of worship, in private property, businesses, or restaurants. Second, property owners would have to place approved no-gun signs at the entrance to prevent concealed guns from legally being carried onto their property. Third, the bill preempts home rule on regulation of handguns, handgun ammunition, and assault weapons. Note, HB 183 preempts home rule on assault weapons unless a ban is passed by a municipality before or within 10 days after the effective date of the act. So we urge the City Council to pass an ordinance that regulates the ownership and possession of assault weapons while you still can. I am leaving you with a December 2012 document from the Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence on a model law to ban assault weapons for your consideration. The St. Nick's Peace and Justice Committee believes that if these provisions remain in House Bill 183, they could negatively impact public safety in Evanston. We urge the City Council to speak out regarding these provisions of the bill and to urge Governor Quinn to veto the most egregious parts of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Marjorie Fujara, 343 Dewey. I'm here to represent Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, and I'm a pediatrician at Stroger, which all of you probably know is ground zero for the gun violence epidemic in Chicago. I'm here to voice my opposition to House Bill 183 and support an assault weapons ban for all of Evanston. About a month ago, I saw a 7-year-old boy in my clinic who told me he had trouble sleeping the night before. He said he heard gunshots in the street. And when I asked him more about it, he said it was an AK-40. And I looked at him and I said, "How did you know it was an AK-40, as he called it?" And he looked at me and he rolled his eyes and sighed, as if to say, "Lady, I know what an assault weapon sounds like." And I thought, wow, this little boy, he's lucky to be alive. He's lucky the bullets didn't shoot through his window and kill him at his kitchen table. But I realize that he's very likely to suffer collateral damage from being enmeshed in this culture of violence. What we are learning about brain development in children is startling. We are learning that toxic stress, as it's called, community violence, actually affects the architecture of the developing brain, making the parts of the brain called the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex a different size than they normally would be, which results in children becoming hyper-responsive to any perceived threat. So it's very likely that this 7-year-old boy will be a 15-year-old boy who decides to pull a trigger in a simple verbal altercation as opposed to walking away and counting to 10. Because this environment that he's been raised in is so full of violence, he's had changes in his brain which he has no control over. Assault weapons have no role in our civilized society. I put shame on the gun manufacturers for marketing these as sporting rifles when they are weapons of war, weapons of mass destruction. Shame on the retailers like Walmart for selling these weapons to ordinary citizens. They have no role in our society. So I not only encourage you to enact an ordinance that would ban these weapons in Evanston, but I also encourage you to adopt the definition proposed by the Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, which is the narrowest definition, which includes one military feature only. Because what happened with the Brady Bill, the previous assault weapon ban that was in place, was gun manufacturers got wise to what was in the bill, and they just modified them cosmetically and sold them anyway. So I think it's really important to have as strong of a restriction on these weapons as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Eileen Heineman. I do not live in Evanston, but I spend most of my time here working in particular at the YWCA at the corner of Church and Ridge. And we're concerned, obviously, about keeping places where children gather safe. And although we don't have control over what the state will decide to do about this, we do know that we encourage and urge the council to be sure that all of us in Evanston have whatever information we need to have approved signs that obviously need to be put up on any of our businesses, our houses of worship, our private homes. I know that there's going to be a particular kind of sign that we need to have, and we would like to have that at the first opportunity that we may need it. We hope we don't need it, but if so, that every resident, anywhere that children gather in particular, has access to those signs so that we can plaster our buildings with them to get the message out that we want to do everything that we can to keep those who are inside of our buildings safe from the scourge of guns. And be with you.
Thank you. Next is Howard Handler, Junad Rizki, Tiffany Rice, and Jean Lindwall. Go ahead, Howard.
Speaking on P9 tonight, the licensing of vacation rentals, Howard Handler with the North Shore Barrington Association of Realtors. We greatly appreciate the efforts by the Planning and Development Committee to lessen the burden that would be imposed upon property owners if this ordinance was adopted. We still maintain that it's still not narrowly focused enough, but we are pleased that the committee exempted properties rented pursuant to or in conjunction with a sale, exempted tenants renting on a short-term basis due to displacement, and also due to hardship. We're also pleased that the committee 2 weeks ago suggested a one-time blanket exemption be incorporated into the ordinance. The blanket exemption was approved by the members of the P&D. Regretfully, it seems that the one-time exemption has been misinterpreted. So in the new ordinance that you have before you tonight, instead of incorporating a blanket exemption into the ordinance, which I believe, if I'm not speaking out of turn, was the intent of the committee, the new ordinance now limits the other exemptions that weren't as limiting before. So now leasebacks, displacements, and hardships are now limited to one time per year. So in other words, an Evanston resident would be allowed to rent due to displacement from a natural disaster another property for less than 30 days, but only once a year. So if a fire struck their home, in order to be able to rent another property for less than 30 days, they'd need to wait 12 months before allowing another natural disaster to strike. So we do hope that if this ordinance is adopted, that it's modified to reflect the intentions of the P&D, which was to provide a blanket exemption for all properties. We ask that Evanston property owners are granted, at a minimum, a one-time exemption for every 12 months. And additionally, while it has not been suggested in our prior feedback, it has occurred to us that we'd ask for an exemption also be included for victims of domestic violence. Domestic violence victims often must leave on short notice and arrange temporary housing. So domestic violence victims will likely not have the luxury of time to wait permission from city staff. Again, thank you for your consideration on this.
Thank you.
I am becoming increasingly troubled here by city staff, that is really mostly Wally, setting criteria and bringing items forward to council which appear not to have been discussed. The Grandmother Park item brought here with the no bid by staff. Actually, in committee, the council members actually acted in a responsible manner for once and actually killed this for now or put it aside. Unfortunately, I do not still agree, though, with the fact that this is only open to Evanston bidders. All bidders should be bidding on this. You can see tonight with the Ecology Center greenhouses, an open bid process, the amount of money the city really is saving, or at least not spending extra. Unfortunately, there seems to be some problem here when we do things the way we're doing things. There's some really serious issues here. Wally continues to bring items forward that make no sense. This $2 million in the parking fund is to be used for an arts center. Why aren't we taxpayers getting a refund as sense of meter users, those who use the meters in this town? Why aren't we taking the $2 million to lower the meter rate? I mean, that affects everyone in town, and I think that's another matter. Why is this money being misused really on an arts center rather than when it's part of the parking fund? This is the only maybe creative financing we have here. It's maybe the only creativity. On another matter, the city is selling zoning. I stated that about Peckish 1, but really where the city had a financial interest. But with the Harley Clark Mansion, it is extremely clear. The city spells that out in its proposal. The city will zone to suit, which basically is selling zoning. Any council member doesn't understand that should understand that. And finally, the city council at one point, I understood, instructed Mr. Bobkowitz to inform the public the fact that the city water transponders are breaking and over 1,400 customers are getting inaccurate readings. Why hasn't Mr. Bobkowitz informed the public? This has been at least 3 or 4 meetings ago that I heard council members ask him to do it. So is there no deadline for this? Will it wait till he finally finishes the project and many more meters are out and customers have problems with their bills? When is there going to be a deadline on this, please? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, council members. My purpose here tonight is basically dissemination of information. I represent the D.J. Coleman Foundation, and this weekend we are planning a launch rally to be held at Mason Park at 1 p.m. The launch rally will be a kickoff for all promotional activities for the Day World Weekend. I'm not sure if everyone's heard about that, but I can explain to you what Day World Weekend represents in this mission explanation. Day World Weekend was established in 2013 to honor the memory of D.J. Coleman. D.J., affectionately called Day, was known in the Evanston community as a model student and athlete. Family and friends were a central part of D.J.'s life as he excelled in school and sports. Tragically, D.J. lost his life to gun violence in September 2012. Deeply impacted by D.J.'s death, the youth in the community were left searching for meaningful ways to commemorate his life. Day World Weekend seeks to unite the community through an annual weekend of events which promote the core values that shape D.J.'s life, which are family support, determination, and positive social interactions. Day World Weekend will not only allow the community to engage in activities that highlight D.J.'s love of family and sports, but will lay the framework for positive enforcement in the lives of our youth. So the launch rally, I consider it our induction into the community, letting the community know who we are, what we represent, and what our plans are going into the future. So if you could come out, that'll be awesome. The first 150 people to come will get a free scoop of Andy's ice cream. So we're going to have fun and start all promotional activities, register kids for a basketball clinic that is going to be a component of the Data World Weekend as well. So, thank you.
Tiffany, don't you want to say something about fundraising?
Oh. We're also accepting donations at that time, too. So, the website is dc3f.org. Donations can be made through the website as well. And we're planning some fundraising activities throughout the summer, and I'll make sure you're aware of those as well.
Thank you very
Mayor.
much.
Thank you, Mayor.
Hi, Jean Lindwall, 625 Library Place. I'm here to talk a little bit about the Evanston Arts Center. At last week's First Ward meeting, one of those present asked about the Art Center and what was happening, based on what they'd seen in the paper. And, the city manager basically said, if there's a deal to be had, then we'll bring the discussion to the community. One of my neighbors asked whether or not the city had considered demolition of the building if it's too expensive to maintain, which pretty clearly has not been part of the discussion, wasn't part of anticipated with the RFI. And I think that at this point, I'd like to encourage the council to have that discussion with the community now before you proceed any further in trying to wrap up a deal with your prospective purchaser. Evanston's history of parkland acquisition and successful reuse of the structures on the site is pretty impressive, and it's a legacy that's gone back and been important public policy since Evanston's first comprehensive plan in 1917. The examples include the Civic Center, which really wasn't bought because this building is so fabulous. It was bought because of the open space behind the Civic Center in Graham Park. Similarly, in the mid-'70s, when the school district decided that they didn't need certain elementary schools, the city got Noyes Park, and again, they wanted the parkland and not necessarily the Noyes Art Center, which is also on your agenda to discuss. Miller School in the 3rd Ward, again, while that's the building was successfully leased and then subsequently sold to a school, the purchase in the region for the acquisition was the open space. Similarly, the Harley Clark property was purchased for the beach and the open space. And while the city has been very fortunate in finding not-for-profits to use the buildings, and in the case of the city, I mean, I think that there wasn't a particular user besides the city for this building. There's not been a real history to preserve buildings at all costs. There's been over the years discussion about whether or not this building should be maintained. The former City Hall over on Oak Street, which was where I started my career as Evanston's first preservation coordinator, was a country club that the city bought and adaptively reused until they purchased this property, at which point that building, rather than preserve what was a landmark and a pretty attractive structure, but it was tired, worn out, and the decision was to demolish the thing. If there's not a user that's consistent with and falls within the permitted or special uses under the open space district, and the rehab costs are beyond what the city can afford, then I think that the citizens of Evanston would be better served by expanding the open space at Lighthouse Landing, consistent with the clear goals, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive plan. Unlike the bed and breakfast discussion, where there are, objectives on both sides of the discussion. In the case of acquisition and maintenance of public open space, the comprehensive plan, the Lakefront Master Plan, and other public documents are quite clear as to the intent. The RFI asked respondents to consider a wide range of uses and stated that the city would rezone the property to accommodate the new use. There are 2 ways that the zoning ordinance can be amended. You can do a map amendment, which in the case of that property, I think would be a real outrageous example of spot zoning. Alternately, you could amend the open space district to add, for example, a hotel to the list of uses that would be allowed. At which point, you'd be opening yourself up to the possibility of a resort and spa at Loveless Park, or perhaps a hotel and sports bar at James Park.
Jane, I do need you to wrap up.
Okay, I'm basically done. I think that the standards for amendments must be met if the city doesn't want to leave itself open for lawsuits. And they're quite clear: consistency with the comprehensive plan and compatibility with the development character of the surrounding area. So I really, really encourage you to think before you leap.
Thank you. That concludes public comments. Next is a special order of business, which I believe I asked for. And I'd like to thank all the residents who spoke. I think the issue before us is Mr. Farrar is trying to find out an assault weapons definition that will withstand a lawsuit. So that's his challenge. And thank you all for submitting them. I've forwarded everything you sent me to Mr. Farrar, but it's still a little difficult to know what will and won't pass. But the reason we're discussing it tonight is that I've been concerned about exactly the same thing you were concerned about, making sure that we have something for the 10-day window, because if this comes up in August, it would be hard for us to pull a meeting together, get a quorum, and pass something. So it's better to have something passed and then figure out what the perfect thing is if we can, and pass that if there's time. So take it away, Grant.
Madam Mayor, members of council, Clerk Green, Grant for our Corporation Council. Yes, Madam Mayor, you did ask that we at the Law Department do some due diligence research with respect to the current status of state gun legislation. As you are all aware, the General Assembly passed HB 183 as amended on May 31st, which has numerous provisions pertaining to the regulation of firearms in the state of Illinois. Of particular note and of particular immediacy is the language that speaks to assault weapons and preempts home rule authority with respect to regulating same. In an interesting legislative turn of drafting, which I don't think I've ever seen as a lawyer or as a former member of the General Assembly research staff, they had a 10-day opt-in provision essentially for home rule communities to legislate and regulate assault weapons. So what I've done in the last couple days is I've reviewed some of the ordinances, specifically the City of Chicago, and some of the other national ordinances and other national research material relative to assault weapons regulations. And I do have much more of a grasp with respect to what that language is and what could be a possible legislative approach if the City Council were to direct the Law Department to begin drafting an assault weapons ordinance that would regulate and legislate in that particular area. So that is the point that the mayor asked me to speak to, a particular urgency and immediacy. Just as an overall point that I think is important for the community and this council and everyone to understand is there's a lot of flux right now with this legislation. It's in partial response to a Seventh Circuit Court decision that was delivered in December 2012, which essentially told the General Assembly you have to enact some sort of legislation relative to concealed carry and gun regulation. The General Assembly did respond. One of the things that's also running on a parallel track is the decision point for Attorney General Madigan if she wishes to appeal that decision to the United States Supreme Court. That deadline has been extended to July 9th. How does that relate to what is going on the floor tonight? Well, it's important because this also ties into whether Governor Quinn signs the legislation and what the effective date of this legislation would actually be. Because assault weapons regulation, as provided for in the bill, must be enacted 10 days after the effective date, and the effective date would be the date after 10 days after Governor Quinn signs the legislation. So I think as a prudent measure, and I'm standing before you tonight, is that I would request direction from the mayor and the council to myself and the law department, and if it is the will of the council to get the law department working on an assault weapons ban, we can certainly get that on for the agenda at the next regularly scheduled council meeting, because it does not appear that Governor Quinn is going to be signing this legislation anytime soon, especially since he's got the additional time. And if we do need to do a special meeting, we would certainly have the ability to do that. But if it's the will of the mayor and the council to have the law department start working on that regulation, I'm much farther along in the process than I was 48 hours ago.
Thank you, Grant. I appreciate the work, and that way we would be covered regardless of what the governor did or the attorney general did or the Supreme Court did. We'd at least be covered. Alderman Grover.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Farrar. I don't want to jump to any conclusions about what the will of the council is, but I'm very interested in making sure that we have in place some kind of regulation, prohibition on the possession of or ownership of assault weapons. And I guess my question is, Mr. Farrar, can we define that, or is it safer to wait for the state to define assault weapons for us, or do we just go forward, use our best guess as to what's going to be effective local regulation
Well, the state legislation, of course, does not define assault weapons, so that complicated my approach to this issue. So in the days that have passed since I've started digesting the 123 pages of the state bill, I have come across definitions of assault weapons, and I believe that the definition in the current Chicago ordinance is probably the best, most transportable vehicle for us going forward. So we can come up with the definition for assault weapons. It's been vetted, and I think that would get us to where we would want to go.
And again, as one of our speakers suggested, a definition that really captures as many different types of assault weapons as possible.
There is.
I think they suggested a narrow definition, but I'm looking really for a broad definition so that.
You can essentially define the weapon by the type of equipment that is on it in terms of the trigger guards, if it has a barrel shroud for heat transfer, a muzzle silencer. There are ways you can define it, and it's all already set forth in the Chicago ordinance, which is pretty broad in terms of what a definition of an assault weapon is.
And then I understood, too, that the House Bill 183, while home rule authority is significantly preempted, except as to assault weapons, that there's another category of weapons that local ordinance can also regulate possession and ownership of. Two-handed weapons or some kind of long barrel weapons. Am I wrong, or have you not reached that point in the
Alderman Grover, I've been
yet?
focused on the assault weapons. I've not gotten to the long rifle section yet.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Is anyone opposed to our coming up with an assault weapon? I had complete confidence in all of you. Alderman Rainey?
Are we in agreement that we use the Chicago model?
I think to avoid getting into a lawsuit, that's a very good beginning place. Alderman Holmes?
I would just want to move that we instruct the law department to go ahead and get started.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you all. Oh, we got applause, too. Alderman Rainey, would you please give us the consent agenda? Go for applause, Ann. You can do it.
Maybe dramatically.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The consent agenda is as follows. First item, approval of minutes of the regular meeting, May 13. Approval of minutes of regular city council meeting of May 20. Oh, I'm sorry. It's not loud enough. The Administration and Public Works Committee met this evening and recommend you approve the following. The city bills through May 19, $2,658,927.09. The bills through June 11 in the amount of $2,735,378.71. And our credit card activity ending April 30 in the amount of $126,522.47. We ask you approve a contract with Alpha Paintworks for fire hydrant painting. It's a one-year contract extension in the amount of $27,625. We recommend you approve a contract with Schroeder & Schroeder for the 2013 50/50 sidewalk replacement project in the amount of $157,206. The city share would be in the amount of $100,000, with $57,206 provided by private funds. We ask your approval also of a contract with RNOW Inc. for the purchase of a recycle truck in the amount of $233,319. Approval is also requested of a single source contract award recommendation to the Larson Equipment and Furniture Company for the Noise Theater seating replacement project in the amount of $46,609. Approval is also requested for a contract award to Construction, Consulting, and Disbursement Services, Inc. for the 2013 Ecology Center Greenhouse Addition project. I believe this should be off the consent agenda and will be addressed by the committee chair. Next is Resolution 36R13, an amendment of the Grandmother Park Agreement. That should be off the consent agenda and addressed by the committee chair. Resolution 37R13 relating to prevailing wages for public works projects in order to comply with the provisions of the Illinois Prevailing Wage Act. This is an annual resolution, and we request your approval. Ordinance 52013, we ask that you approve introduction, which amends City Code to establish a three-way stop at Lakeshore Boulevard and Hamilton Street. A7 is Ordinance 55013, also for introduction. We ask that you agree to authorize the city to borrow funds from the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency Water Pollution Control Loan Program for the construction of the large diameter sewer rehab on Central Park Avenue and Main Street / Sheridan Road. The city is authorized, this ordinance will authorize us to borrow $1,894,000. Ordinance 62013, reducing the number of Class B liquor licenses after management change at the Orrington Hotel to 17, and Alderman Fisk has requested this rules be suspended. So I'm moving introduction and the suspension of the rules on this matter, A8. If anybody has a problem with that, tell me now. A9, the same thing. I'm moving introduction of Ordinance 63013, increasing the number of Class B liquor licenses. Dow Escondido, LLC, doing business as Hilton Orrington, increasing the number of licenses to 18 to permit the issuance to this organization for introduction. I will now move suspension of the rules on that ordinance as well. The Planning and Development Committee met this evening and asked you to approve a sidewalk cafe for Carmen's. This is a first-time application and will permit Carmen's of Evanston, a Type 1 restaurant at 1241 Chicago Avenue, to have a sidewalk cafe. We ask your approval also for a first-time application for a sidewalk cafe permit for Forever Yogurt, a Type 2 restaurant at 1739 Sherman. A request is being made for you to approve a sidewalk cafe for Starbucks. It's a first-time application for the cafe permit at 1734 Sherman Avenue. Approval is also requested for a one-year extension for a planned development for 1915-1919 Gray Avenue for the construction of a 4-unit building by Brinshaw. Another request, a similar one, for approval for a 2-year time extension for the planned development approved for 31820 Dempster Street. This was approved in 2008, and we're asking for an extension for 2 years on that. For introduction is Ordinance 59013, granting a special use for a Type 2 restaurant at 749 Chicago Avenue called Dollop Coffee and Hooja Mama Pie Company. This is for introduction. P7 is Ordinance 60013. I believe that probably should be off the consent agenda. Pardon me?
It comes off if you mention it.
Oh.
So it's off.
Oh, well, it's definitely off, regardless. Ordinance 47013 is for action, and I'm going to ask that that be taken off the consent agenda. It is the ordinance having to do with commercial indoor recreation. Ordinance 50013 is for action and is also off the consent agenda. That has to do with licensing of vacation rentals. For action is Ordinance 36013. We ask that you approve this ordinance, zoning ordinance, to rezone 1715 Church Street, 1703 Darrow, and 1711 Darrow from I-2 to MXE. The Plan Commission and city staff also recommend approval. For action also is Ordinance 37013. We ask you approve amending the zoning ordinance to rezone 2153, 2143, and 2145 Ashland, 1515 and 1523 Payne, and 2150, 2156 Green Bay Road from C2 to MXE. Also for action tonight is Ordinance 53013. We ask your approval for a special use for a retail establishment at 1104 Davis Street called Not Fade Away. Under Human Services Committee, the Township Supervisor recommends approval of the bills through May 2013, $198,910.52. Economic Development Committee recommends approval of the following, and I'm just going to read them off as a group, and then you'll all vote yes. Approval of a Great Merchants Grant to the Central Street Business Association, the amount of $9,000, upon a receipt of additional estimates for approved work. Approval of a Great Merchants Grant to the Chicago Dempster Merchants Association, $1,500, contingent upon the provision to staff of the required additional estimates. Approval of a Great Merchants Grant to Dr. Hill's Business Association, $9,000. Approval of a Great Merchants Grant to the Main Street Merchants Association for $9,000. Approval of a Great Merchants Grant to Evanston West End Business Association, $8,685. The Transportation and Parking Committee met and recommend the following. I think this should have been an AMPW, probably, this item. But anyway, recommends approval of 51013, which amends Title 10 of the Motor Vehicle and Traffic, Chapter 8, Section 3, Schedule of License Fees of the City Code. The ordinance amends B, disabled veterans, by deleting the requirement to have a vehicle awarded in order to be qualified for a discounted rate, and to add E, active military personnel. Therefore, any active duty service member who makes application for a wheel tax license for one motor vehicle owned by the member shall not be required to pay the usual fee for such a wheel tax license, city sticker. The Rules Committee met and requests your approval of funding for First Night in the amount of $10,000 through the 150th Anniversary Fund for Activities. The City Manager asks our approval and for the closure of city offices Friday, July 5th, in recognition of the 150th anniversary of the city's incorporation, and provide one floating holiday to employees who must work that day. Madam Mayor has not presented any appointments, and therefore I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Thank you, Alderman Rainey. It's been moved and seconded to pass the consent agenda, and seeing no lights on for further discussion, City Clerk, would you call the roll?
Alderman Braithwaite. Aye. Alderman Nguyen. Aye. Alderman Wilson. Aye. Alderman Holmes.
Aye.
Alderman Tindem.
Aye.
Alderman Grover.
Aye.
Alderman Rainey.
Aye.
Alderman Burris.
Aye.
Alderman Fisk. 9-0.
9-0, the consent agenda passes. Alderman Rainey, I have to call on you again for administration and
Yes.
public works.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The first item off the consent agenda is A4, Resolution 36R13, amendment to the Grandmother's Park Agreement. I'd like to move approval and then explain.
Alderman, what about the Ecology Center?
1.5 first.
Okay, you're right. Sorry about that. Approval of the contract award to construction, consulting, and disbursement services for the 2013 Ecology Center Greenhouse Addition project. Madam Mayor, we're holding that in committee for more information from city staff. Director Robinson is going to review the specifications for this project, and perhaps we'll have it back on our agenda for the next meeting.
Okay.
Anything else?
Alderman Fisk?
Thank you. Alderman Rainey, I was hoping that you were going to take into consideration the memo from Virginia Beatty.
We did.
Discuss that.
That's
Okay,
probably
great.
pretty much why we're where we are.
Thank you very much.
Yes, she was very helpful. Okay, back to Grandmother's Park. Could I have a motion to approve, and then I'll explain the amendment? There was discussion. Alderman Burris opposed this. And secondly, the committee agreed that we would ask Grandmother's Park Committee to provide estimates as we do in the facade improvement program. The request was to not require bidding and to use only Evanston contractors. The committee agreed that we approved of the idea of using only Evanston contractors, but we'd like to see 3 estimates. So they have all of their documentation already put together, and they're going to bring us 3 estimates at our next meeting, and hopefully we'll just resolve this and move it forward.
All right. That
And
sounds good.
they appeared not to have a big problem with that, because we're not objecting to anything other than no bids.
You're not against grandmothers or parks?
No, but I did have a constituent ask me what about the grandfather park? So, well, anyway, so no. So it's being held in committee until our next meeting.
Thank you.
All right. The next one, let's see. A8. Ordinance 62-013 is for introduction. It moved introduction, and we suspended the rules, and now I move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve Ordinance 62-013, reducing the number of Class B liquor licenses after a management change at the Orrington Hotel. Seeing no lights on to discuss this, City Clerk, would you call the roll?
Alderman Braithwaite.
Aye.
Alderman Nguyen.
Aye.
Alderman Wilson.
Aye.
Alderman Holmes.
Aye.
Alderman Tindem.
Aye.
Alderman Grover. Alderman Rainey. Alderman Burris. Alderman Fisk.
Aye.
9-0.
9-0, the motion passes.
Ordinance 63-013 increases Class B liquor licenses, issuing one to Dow Escondido LLC, doing business as Hilton Orrington. This has been introduced, and the rules have been suspended. I move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve Ordinance 63-013, increasing the number of Class B liquor licenses at the Hilton Orrington. City Clerk, would you call the roll?
Alderman Braithwaite. Aye. Alderman Nguyen. Aye. Alderman Wilson. Aye. Alderman Holmes.
Aye.
Alderman Tindem.
Aye.
Alderman Grover. Aye. Alderman Rainey.
Aye.
Alderman Burris. Aye. Alderman Fisk.
Aye.
9-0.
9-0, the motion passes. Alderman Rainey, that completes your report. Next is Planning and Development. Alderman Nguyen.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I think the item that we have.
E7.
Yes, P7, Ordinance 60-013, granting a special use for a bed and breakfast establishment at 1622 Forest. We heard a great deal of comment from the public, and I move introduction. Then item P8. Wait, do we have to vote?
Yeah, we need
Right,
to vote.
excuse me.
Thank you.
I'm a little distracted.
It's all right. City Clerk, Alderman Fisk, sorry.
Yes, thank you. I'll be voting against the introduction, citing the ZBA's findings that the special use is inconsistent with the city's master general plan and creates a cumulative negative effect on the neighborhood.
Thank you. No one else, I believe, wants to speak to the issue. City Clerk, would you call the roll?
Alderman Braithwaite.
Aye.
Alderman Nguyen.
No.
Alderman Wilson.
Aye.
Alderman Holmes.
Aye.
Alderman Tindem.
Aye.
Alderman Grover. Alderman Rainey. Alderman Burris. And Alderman Fisk.
No.
7-2.
7-2, the motion passes.
Yes, Madam Mayor, item P8 is the next item, Ordinance 47-013, amending the zoning ordinance to allow commercial indoor recreation as a special use in the I-2 district. I move approval.
It's been moved and seconded. Alderman Wilson?
Thank you. At our last meeting, I had suggested a change, and the change was to add one sentence to the end of Section 2, which is the definition. And that change would have been to add the language that would read, for purposes of this definition, the term commercial purpose as defined in this section shall not apply. I explained it before. Hopefully everyone remembers why I suggested we do that. The purpose is to make sure that the different definition does not get incorporated at some point in the future by city councils who don't recall what we were trying to accomplish with this particular provision.
Alderman Rainey.
Could you just explain that one more time?
The term commercial purpose is defined elsewhere in the ordinance, and that's a different definition. My concern was that someone might look at the word commercial in the context of commercial indoor recreation and interpret that as being incorporating the commercial purpose definition, when our city attorneys have explained to us a few times now that this definition is an independent definition and would not incorporate that. I still felt that it was unclear, and I felt it was appropriate and necessary to include just some qualifying language that sets forth that it does not, the term commercial purpose does not apply.
Alderman Rainey.
Madam Mayor, my iPad has frozen. I cannot get to the ordinance.
Everyone makes fun of me, but here you go.
I know. No, I'm not going to go through that. Does the current representation of the ordinance include the word not-for-profit in it?
Yes.
It does. I am going to ask that not-for-profit be removed. Public, and I'm just going according to my recollection now. I don't have it in front of me. Public or private, I believe, is sufficient to indicate that one is for-profit and one is not. And I don't believe there is one other, and perhaps Mr. Farrar can, I hope I don't get corrected, but I don't believe the word not-for-profit, the phrase, is included in any other part of our zoning ordinance. It's either public or private. And if it's public or private, I mean, it's either not-for-profit or for-profit. I don't understand why the effort is being made here. And I remember you at one time saying you did not even agree to have not-for-profit in this ordinance. And I'd like to move to remove it. I think it is. I read it over the weekend. I believe it is in there.
If we can include that language that I just mentioned before, I think it's fine to take out that for-profit or not-for-profit common non-governmental addition.
There's just not any reason for it, and therefore I would like to move that. I understand that anybody can go to the tax appeal board and plead a case for being tax exempt. There's not much we can do about that. We set up various zoning districts where that can be allowed. I think in the long run we should even have rules that, for example, in a TIF district, which this is not, that you should not be allowed to take property off the tax rolls. So in this case, we can't do that. So I understand that my chances of getting a tax-exempt property in an I-2 district on Dempster Street is great. And that makes me very sad, but I'm smart enough to know there's not much I can do about it other than go down and argue when they go to appeal. So I would like the not-for-profit to be taken out of there. I just think it just lays the groundwork and opens the door and opens our arms to embrace not-for-profits. And that our property tax exempt. So I move that we remove the reference to profit, not-for-profit.
So in other words, you're suggesting we remove that whole phrase, the whole underlined phrase.
I'm not going to object to your commercial phrase,
Right, which I appreciate.
But I'm asking that we remove the reference to not-for-profit.
Well, okay, that whole underlined clause.
I can't look at it. Look, it's frozen on page 569.
Somebody let Alderman Rainey look at it. There's a whole clause that was added. The clause reads, for-profit or not-for-profit, comma, non-governmental. So you're suggesting remove that whole underlined
Public
section.
and private is already in there.
Section 2. So as long as we take out the whole underlined clause, I'm okay with that, provided my addition at the end is included.
I don't object.
Is that okay?
Okay, so you have one proposed amendment.
So my proposed amendment is, taking Alderman Rainey's concern into consideration, I propose that we amend the draft that was given to us such that the clause that is underlined in the draft provided to us, reading, quote, for-profit or not-for-profit, comma, non-governmental, end quote, be removed from the proposed ordinance, and then we add at the end of Section 2 the following language, quote, for purposes of this definition, comma, the term, quote, commercial purpose, end quote, as defined in this section, comma, shall not apply, period, end of addition.
Thank you. Alderman Grover?
I'm just trying to find the page in the packet where I can add that language in. I think we're probably looking at last meeting's packet.
Page, I'll tell you what page it is. It is page 434.
434. Mine does not say that.
It doesn't say it. I'm asking to add it.
No, mine doesn't say even the front.
My version doesn't have profit or non-profit in it.
Alderman Rainey, it looks like we already took that out.
But mine, I read it this weekend.
Was it from last?
I think that would be the version from
Our last meeting.
a prior meeting.
We're looking It's at public or private, 4/22, non-governmental.
2013.
Yeah. That's the last one
Public or
that's in the
private,
packet.
This is this, okay.
On page 434. It's not,
Never mind.
that's not.
All right, 434, it's already out. Good? Got that, Mr. Farrar?
Then I'll oppose your other amendment.
Then you'll post it. That's awesome.
I don't like it.
Could we debate it for 45 minutes?
Let's.
Let's not.
Moving right along.
All right,
That's-
I beg your pardon. I must have.
All right, so maybe it's the
I read
last
it. Yeah. No, it's in.
No problem. It's been moved and seconded, I believe, to approve ordinance 47013 as amended. Does anyone need to have the amendment repeated? Excellent. City Clerk, would you call the roll?
Alderman Braithwaite.
Yes. Aye.
Alderman Nguyen.
Aye.
Alderman Wilson.
Aye.
Alderman Holmes.
Aye.
Alderman Tindem.
Aye.
Alderman Grover.
Aye.
Alderman Rainey. Alderman Burris.
Aye.
Alderman Fisk.
Aye.
9-0.
9-0, the motion passes. Alderman Nguyen, I believe there's one more.
P9.
9.
Yes, Madam Mayor, P9, Ordinance 50013, enacting a new Title V, Chapter 9 of the City Code to require the licensing of vacation rentals. I move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Alderman Wilson.
Thank you. A couple of concerns. First of all, while I'm not thrilled to have the P&D committee potentially spend a large amount of time on this, I suppose I can live with that. However, in our prior discussions, I had hoped that we could add, I'm looking for the exceptions, page 457 of the packet,
457.
under 5-9-3, the exemptions. My hope was that we would have an exemption for people who wanted to do this, or in other words, if you did it once a year, that would be okay. Here we've got it, if you do it once a year, it's okay, but only if 3 other things apply. My personal intention was to have, I'll call it that, grace, period or grace allowance to allow people to do this up to once a year, but no more than once a year.
I think that's what we all intended.
And that was my impression of our collective intention. The other aspect of this that I find a little bit troubling is the fact that someone who falls into the exemptions has to provide the city manager with advance information about it. So even with these, what I think we consider to be no-brainer exemptions, renting back a home in conjunction with a sale, whatever, these would require affirmative action by a person who is undertaking this to go to the city manager and go through a process. And I don't know that that necessarily should have to be required. And then if somebody weren't to do that, they're at risk of being fined. And that wasn't my personal intention for people who are just doing the kind of the one-time exemptions. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Alderman Nguyen?
I thought that's what we were doing the last time. And so that we were permitting someone who wanted to rent their home once a year to do that without having to go through all this various bureaucracy for someone who's clearly going to be doing it for a much more serious purpose over time. So would it be possible to amend 5-9-3, Section C, by removing from that first paragraph the phrase, provided the operator provides advance proof of one of the following to the city manager or his designee. So it would read, subsection A of this section notwithstanding, no license shall be required to operate a vacation rental for no more than one rental period per dwelling unit per 12-month period. Or
first exception.
Right, yes.
And so we'd have 4 exceptions.
4 exception. And then renumber them. Or 2, the rental agreement was executed pursuant to. 3, the temporary vacation rental guests are displaced. 4, the applicant will suffer demonstrable hardship. I move that amendment.
I second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to pass Ordinance 50013 as amended. Does anyone have any more comment on that? Alderman Burris.
Just a very brief comment. I'm voting against the ordinance completely. I don't think that we need it. I think it's redundant. And we've already seen on the internet ways for people to get around what we're trying to enact. Of you can rent my house for 30 days, but if you decide not to stay for that 30 days, then it would be this per day. So they're going to find ways around it. I think we're trying to fix something that's really not broken. There's a few incidents that have happened that have caused a problem, but I just think we're over legislating here, so I will be voting no.
Thank you. Any more comments? All right, City Clerk, would you call the roll?
It's on the amendment.
On the amendment.
Alderman Braithwaite.
Aye.
Alderman Nguyen.
Aye.
Alderman Wilson.
Aye.
Alderman Holmes.
No.
Alderman Tindem.
Aye.
Alderman Grover. Alderman Rainey. Alderman Burris. No. Alderman Fisk.
Aye.
7-2.
7-2, the amendment passes. Now we're voting on the ordinance as
That was the, right, yes.
voting on the ordinance as amended. City Clerk, would you call the roll?
No, you just voted on the
Amendment.
and that went
No, as
Now we're
amended.
on the main motion.
right. Alderman
Oh, wait a minute,
Yes.
sorry, Alderman Rainey got her light on.
Could we just briefly get an explanation from our attorney about how this, we suggested that this operate similar to the first-time application for a sidewalk cafe. Does the application for vacation rental have to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals the first time around, or is it all going to be approved by staff? And then if there's no complaints, then it's an automatic renewal?
Madam Mayor, members of council, Clerk Green Grant for our corporation council, this would not be going to the ZBA as
Right,
currently
okay,
drafted.
that's my recollection.
However, I think you might have misunderstood something. It's going to go to P&D.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yes,
All right.
yes, yes.
Right.
And one thing that I think, if people behave, and if the vacation rentals are administered properly, nobody will ever have to come back to make an application. So that's why I'm supporting this. I think it's not going to be as onerous as some would think.
Thank you. Now I think we really are at no further comments. I'm going to count to 3. City Clerk, would you call the roll?
Alderman Braithwaite. Aye. Alderman Nguyen.
Aye.
Alderman Wilson.
No.
Alderman Holmes.
No.
Alderman Tindem.
No.
Alderman Grover.
Aye.
Alderman Rainey.
Aye.
Alderman Burris. Alderman Fisk.
Aye.
5-4.
5-4, the motion passes. And that concludes your report, Alderman Nguyen.
Yes, it does, Madam Mayor.
All right.
What 5-4? Was the vote 5-4?
Yes.
5-4.
Who was the fourth vote?
It was Wilson, Tindem.
Oh, you voted no, Don? Oh, okay.
All right, we are now at call of the wards. Alderman Braithwaite. Thank you. Alderman Nguyen.
No report, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Alderman Wilson.
No report.
All right. Thanks. Alderman Holmes.
No report.
Thank you. Alderman Tindem.
No report.
Feel free, though. Alderman Grover.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to let you all know that last week, Northwestern University's Associated Student Government passed a resolution calling for meaningful regulation of unmanned aerial systems, specifically supporting the City Council's resolution. I attended that ASG meeting, and I got to tell you, that governing body has a much better view from their seats than we do, with windows on 3 sides of their chambers. That was nice. And we got some really good proactive community discussions coming up on some really important community assets, and that would be the Recreation Huddle coming up on Saturday and the Tree Summit a week from Saturday. And thanks in advance to the Lad Arboretum Committee for all that they've done over the last several years to buff up and support that great amenity.
Thank you. Alderman Rainey.
No report.
Thank you. Alderman Burris.
Yes, thank you. The Ridgeville Park District is running a 5-week youth basketball league this summer. They're still seeking players. The league starts June 25th. So
Tell the ages.
11 to 14, I believe is the right answer. But all the information is on the Ridgeville Park District website. And the district also has several mini camps this summer for ages, I believe, 7 through 14 as well. And please remember that the Ridgeville Farmers Market is on Wednesday, 3:30 to 7 p.m. And finally, the 9th Ward will have a meeting on July 10th at 7 p.m. at the Levy Center.
Thank you. Alderman Fisk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've been asked to read the following to you tonight. It is a letter from a First Ward resident to President Shapiro of Northwestern University. Dear Dr. Shapiro, as a homeowner near to your institution, I surrender. As the years have gone by, the noise outside my house, the daily trash accumulation in my yard, and the minor but recurring property damage have all been on a steady increase. Really, who would steal an American flag from a porch on Memorial Day? Things were enormously exacerbated when, without ever mentioning it to me, I might add, you placed a campus shuttle bus stop on the south side of my property. I am simply worn down. Last weekend's Dillo Day was the straw that broke the camel's back. At one point, I had to suggest to about 12 students that they find some place to lounge other than on my front steps. The red Solo Cups beer bottles and the discarded food litter were beyond the pale. The noise into the night was again aggravating, and one more chunk of hedge was broken down. I realize that you've taken token efforts to discourage this kind of behavior, and I believe that it represents a minority, though a significant minority, of your students. But instead of diminishing, my unfavorable experiences have only increased in the last few years. And my perception is that there is a culture of tolerance or perhaps indifference on the institution's part. Students will be students and that sort of thing. So yes, I hold you and your office in the end accountable for this behavior. Not only am I worn down and aggravated as a homeowner, I am also, by coincidence, an adjunct faculty member in your institution. That connection is now also a source of some sense of shame, guilt by association, I guess. What to do? I have no intent of any sort of legal action. I do not have deep pockets like your institution, and given NU's general stance toward community relations, which might well be something that students learn from, I would have no chance of a happy outcome. And however deplorable rudeness, insensitivity, and disrespect may be, a court of law hardly seems the place to address such matters of character and behavior. So I've decided on a twofold strategy. First, I will sell my house and move. It will take a while to do the usual fixing up and such, maybe a year or so, but I'm leaving. Being angry and disgusted on a regular basis is not a good way to live. Moving will save me that aggravation. Secondly, I ask that this letter serve as a submission of my resignation as an adjunct faculty member in the program in medical humanities and bioethics in the Feinberg School of Medicine. That will take care of my shame. It was not like this when I moved into my house 18 years ago, nor when nearly at the same time I became an adjunct faculty member. Because of this, I'm asking a referral, imagine, to staff and ANPW to regulate bus service for vehicles larger than 20,000 pounds and to require owners' consent when bus stops are placed on public property right next to, within 20 feet of a residence.
Thank you. Alderman Nguyen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I neglected to make an announcement. It's come to my attention that Evanston lost a really committed public citizen last fall. Ann Diener passed away, and she was such a presence here and served on the Plan Commission, the Preservation Commission, and really was a conscience for Planning and Development Committee. She was never afraid to ask a tough question, an embarrassing question to an alderman. And I have letters of Ann's filled with clippings of interesting stories she found in the Wall Street Journal, in the New York Times, about land use and how those things could apply to Evanston. She was always engaged, and I really do miss her. I liked all of her advice and her commentary, and she was one of those balanced citizens who had a strong opinion but recognized that we all live in community. She was born here in Evanston. She lived in the house that her parents built on Forest Avenue. So thank you. And it was very innovative when it was built at the time. So she's very much missed, and she really was a true Evanstonian in all of the best sense. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Alderman Wilson, do you have a motion for us?
I do. Pursuant to 5 Illinois compiled statutes, ILCS 120/2A, I move that the City Council convene into executive session to discuss agenda items regarding personnel and litigation. These agenda items are permitted subjects to be considered in executive session and are enumerated exceptions under the Open Meetings Act. These exceptions are 5 ILCS 120/2A, C1, and C11.
Second. Been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.